Okay, it looks like we're live. Hi, everyone. I'm McKenna from Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and I am so excited to be joined today by one of my favorite authors, who I also have the honor of calling a friend, Ian Rankin. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you, McKenna. I'm in dark, cold Edinburgh.
We are not dark or cold here in Houston. It's about 70 degrees and sunny today. It's enviable weather on one of our rare enviable weather days. So I'm going to go ahead and do your official introduction here, and then we'll get going. Ian Rankin is the #1 international best-selling author of the John Rebus novels. He's the recipient of the CWA Diamond Dagger Award for Lifetime Achievement, as well as the winner of an Edgar Award and a CWA Gold Dagger for Best Books of the Year. His other titles and honors include being a recipient of the OBE. He lives in Edinburgh, Scotland, with his wife and their 2 sons, and he is with us today to talk about A Song for the Dark Times, the latest in the Rebus series. So, yay! If you have questions, please pop them in the live chat. I'm going to be glancing down at my phone throughout this. Occasionally, I'm not checking text. I'm looking for your questions. So don't be shy. There's no such thing as a dumb question. I also want to mention that if you'd like to order a copy of the latest book, we do have signed book plates that we will include with every order. So you and I were chatting a little bit about this earlier, but I know that the pandemic has been especially hard for some people stuck in various forms of lockdown. You must be missing Oxford Bar, and I had read that you weren't able to really visit your family all the time. So how's that going?
Yeah, hi. It's good to be with you. I mean, I'm sadly not physically in Houston because I do love that store and I do love hanging out in Houston, Texas. Yeah, it's been difficult. We've got our younger of our 2 sons is 26 years old. He's got severe special needs, disabled. He lives in a kind of complex with other young adults who've all got disabilities. And they've been in lockdown basically since the end of February. And at first we tried, doing stuff online, but he's not got a very good spatial awareness of 2D, so screens mean nothing to him. Latterly, we've been able to look over the wall or through the gate when the staff bring him out into the garden on a nice day. But just yesterday, I was able to go in. They've changed the rules, and I was able to go into the compound. I was able to sit in his bedroom with him wearing PPE and give him a hug. So that's the first hug I've managed to give my son since February. So that's been tough. Edinburgh's been strange. I mean, you'll know yourself, during the summer, Edinburgh's usually heaving with people, masses of people, tourists, festivals everywhere, all gone, nothing happening. So walking around the city during lockdown has been strange indeed. Bars, of course, were closed for a long time, then they reopened and they've closed again. That's been tough. And some of these small bars are going to find it very difficult to reopen because they're small. And social distancing is not possible if you want to make any profit. But that's the downside. But I've got a lot of writing done, McKenna, because there's been nothing else to do. And A Song for the Dark Times was mostly written during lockdown. Some of the first draft was written before lockdown, and all the research, luckily, was done before the lockdown. But the second draft, third draft, edits, proofreading was all done during lockdown. And then I've just kept on writing because I found writing therapeutic. I found an escape from all this craziness that's going on around us. And yeah, so I'm getting a lot of writing done.
Well, that's good news for us. I actually had seen in an interview, I don't know if it was The Guardian or elsewhere, where you had mentioned that you were no longer under contract and didn't know what you were going to write. And I was very worried for us readers of yours. So it is good to know that you have more underway. You want to tell us what you've been writing, or is it a
No, I can't. It's embargoed. I've been working on an interesting project. It's not like anything I've ever done before. It's going to be announced fairly soon, but I can't talk about it yet. And having finished that, I'm now thinking of starting a standalone novel. I'm bouncing ideas around for a big standalone book. But in the expectation, the hope that I will come back to Rebus after that, I still feel there's a little bit of unfinished business And I don't want to spoil the ending of the book, but the ending of the book does set up some unfinished business for a future book. So if the good Lord spares me, next year, hopefully I'll write another Rebus book.
That's great news. Yeah, I felt like it was a little weird with the ending of this book to not have another book in the works. So I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, as you said, amount of contracts. So it kind of depends on a publisher wanting to publish the books. But yeah, at the moment, I'm a free agent, as I say in the trade. I guess a baseball term, though, an American football term, a free agent. But, you know, this book's done really well. It's done very well. And it's still in the UK chart after 6-7 weeks. And shows no signs of disappearing from the UK top 10. And people tell me that, you know, fans, long-time fans of the series tell me that if it's not the best, it's certainly one of the best.
I have to say,
it is the best.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. I think that it was, number one, for me, just so refreshing. It's always nice to revisit the characters that you know. So Siobhan and Rebus, like as soon as they're on the page, I'm in. Like, and your voice, it was just. It's hard to describe when you read so many other things and you have a voice that catches you and a new debut and you're so excited about these other things, but then you return to a writer that you've read previously and it just clicks and you go, oh, so nice to be back here. So that was refreshing, but you also have Rebus out of his element. So I've found that on these YouTube videos or our virtual events, one of the nice things about them is because you don't have to make a trip to the bookstore or you don't have to buy the new book, people are discovering new authors. So can you tell us just a little bit about John Rebus and then after that, where he finds himself in this book? Yeah,
well, I don't think you need to have read previous books of mine to read this one and enjoy it. I mean, it's basically a story of a father whose daughter is in trouble, and so he goes to help. It just so happens the father, John Rebus, is a retired detective, and he is a cop to his very DNA. And his daughter's partner has gone missing. Now, the big moral question, or the big question in my mind when I started the book was, is Rebus going to his daughter as a cop or as a father? If he starts to suspect she might have played some part in the disappearance of her partner, will he want to put her in jail? Or will he want to protect her at all costs, up to and including setting someone up, framing someone for a possible crime? So that family dynamic makes for a really interesting story. I've taken Rebus out of his comfort zone because I wanted me to be out of my comfort zone. So having set so many of the books in Edinburgh, where I live and work, I thought this time I'll take him way out of Edinburgh, up to the very far north of Scotland, which happens to be where his daughter lives. It's very wild, rugged, coastal. You know, if you head north, the first place you hit is the North Pole, basically. So it's a bit out of the way, and he has no friends or people he can fall back on for help. He's very much on his own up there. He's also got health issues. If you followed the series, when we first met him in 1987, before you were born, McKenna, he was—
No, that's not true.
He was 40 years old. I mean, he's now in his late 60s in the books, and he's got health issues. He's got COPD, which used to be called emphysema. He's got lung issues. So the book begins with him having to move apartments because he can't manage stairs anymore. And the block that he's in only has stairs. It doesn't have an elevator. So yeah, all of that makes a slightly elegiac book, I suppose. I mean, this is a guy who's no longer a detective, but he's still got all the smarts that a detective needs to have. And give him a case to work on, and he will worry away at it. He will gnaw away at it until he gets a result. It's just this time, does he really want to get the result?
Yeah, and of course, Siobhan and the rest of the crew have a story going on their own in the official police work. But it's very good. Like you said, no previous reading required. So
the Edinburgh angle is interesting because when I started plotting the book back in September last year, I only had this story, the Rebus story. And then I thought, do I need an Edinburgh story? Do I need Siobhan Clarke? Do I need Malcolm Fox? Do I need the gangster Cafferty? And there was another— I've got a big folder of ideas and things, scraps of paper with things written on them, things taken from newspapers. And the thing I'd taken from the newspaper cuttings was something about internment camps in the UK during World War II. That's part of the plot of the book. but also there was some stuff about rich people from overseas, specifically Saudi people, getting in trouble in the UK. And I just thought, well, that's interesting. Edinburgh's got all these rich, entitled students from overseas. What happened if one of them actually got in trouble? So the book pretty much kicks off with the murder of a Saudi. He's not quite a prince, but his family are very well connected in Saudi Arabia. And he's been knifed, stabbed, killed in a part of Edinburgh, a sleazy part of Edinburgh, where you should never have had any, you should never have any place being there. So there's that as well. So you've got the two stories, we bounce backwards and forwards between the two, and there's very slight connections, which of course when I started writing the book, I didn't know were going to be there. The connections revealed themselves to me as I got into the book.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm having problems with my earbuds. All right, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. It was funny when Sean Connery died. That's not funny, but I immediately thought to your scene about the young Saudi kid who was obsessed with James Bond and Sean Connery, and that's why he had his Edinburgh flat. So there's a little tie-in there.
The Saudi student comes to Edinburgh specifically because Sean Connery was born in Edinburgh, and he's a huge fan of James Bond, and he reckons Sean Connery was the best James Bond. I met Sean Connery a couple of times, but I didn't memorably meet him in Edinburgh when he was interested in me ghosting his autobiography. And he'd come to Scotland and he was staying at a friend's house in Edinburgh. So I was invited to go round, and I got there and there was only Sean and me. And there were some sandwiches that somebody had made, and we sat and chatted, and I thought, I'm meeting Sean Connery, oh my God. And I just grabbed the first DVD I could find that had Sean Connery in it because I wanted him to sign something. And it was a film called League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was a film he hated. And after having made that film, he promised he would never make another film. And so I suddenly brandish this and say, hey, Sean, would you mind signing this for me? The director was a madman. I hated making this film. But he signed it anyway. So possibly I've got the only signed copy of that film in existence because Sean Connery hated it so much.
Oh my gosh, that's too funny. I guess he didn't convince you, despite the signature, to ghostwrite that book.
No. I mean, he didn't want to spill any of the dirt. It was going to be a very anodyne text. And I thought, who's going to get the blame for there being no juicy stories? Me. You know, the publisher is not going to be happy, and the fans and the readers aren't going to be happy. So I stepped away from it. Okay,
so back to Rebus. A lot of writers write their main characters, their series protagonists, as never aging and, a little bit bigger than life. And it's an interesting thing you've done, making Rebus not only age, but have health issues to the point that he can't be in his flat anymore, and he's relocating his life collections of books and music, and Siobhan's helping him, and he's definitely a weakened person. Has it been a struggle putting him through that, or has it been kind of a fun writing challenge to age with him? How did you decide to do that, and how's it been for you?
Yeah, he's kind of like the anti-Jack Reacher, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, if you hit him, he will bleed now, and he might not even get back up if you hit him hard enough.
He'll be winded for sure.
Yeah, I mean, sure. But I mean, that macho guy we knew in the early books doesn't exist. The Rebus who could intimidate people with his heft, his physical presence. I mean, he now has to use different tools in his armory to get results. And I've enjoyed that process. I've really enjoyed the challenges that have been presented to me by his aging. For example, he retired, he's no longer a cop. Well, how can I convincingly, realistically, get Rebus involved in a criminal investigation when he's a member of the public? Yeah. He's a civilian. So that's a challenge. The health is a challenge for me, but I think it's given him an extra depth and richness of character, because that knowledge now, that self-knowledge that he is not impregnable, that he is mortal, I think affects the way he goes about his daily life, and certainly affects his way of going about a case and an investigation. So yeah, I mean, fans have been with him from the beginning. Themselves, like me, have grown a bit older as Rebus has grown older. So like him, I ache in the places where I used to play, as the great Leonard Cohen once sang.
Yeah.
So doing it with Rebus is a way maybe of me dealing with my own mortality and the fact that I can't hear as well as I used to. I can't see as well as I used to. My knees hurt, everything hurts. So I just give these problems to Rebus. And interestingly, a year and a half ago, my wife and I downsized. We lived in a lovely big Victorian era detached house in a nice part of Edinburgh with a big garden. We were rattling around in it. Both our kids had grown up and left home. So my wife said, it's time for us to downsize. So we moved into a small apartment in the middle of town. And so I went through that process that I gave to Rebus in this book. Half my books had to go to charity shops. Half my LPs and CDs had to go. I was lucky that the National Library of Scotland said they would take on my archive. So they've taken all the manuscripts, the correspondence, stuff like that. That's all sitting in the vaults of the National Library. Going through that before we moved was a really interesting experience. Digging through 30 years, half a lifetime of accumulated paperwork, deciding what was worth keeping and what wasn't. And, you know, I'm a member of probably the last generation of authors who will leave a proper written archive. Not just emails and computer disks, if that, but, you know, physical manuscripts, rejection letters, and a lot of correspondence. And sadly, most of it correspondence with now deceased people. So Reginald Hill, Ruth Rendell, P.D. James, Colin Dexter, Philip Kerr, Ian Banks, all of them I was in correspondence with at one time or another. So that is now all in the National Library of Scotland, but it was very poignant to go through all of that and have this frustratingly one-sided conversation, because of course I didn't keep the letters I sent to them. Right. I only kept the letters I got from them. So I don't know what I said in my letters to them.
So you put Rebus in the same situation of the downsizing and that you had just gone through.
I did, and it's slightly even weirder than that, because Rebus lives in a street I lived in when I was an impoverished student, when I started writing these books as a student in the 80s. And just after this book was published, and I decided at the start of this book, Rebus would have to move apartments because he can't manage stairs anymore. Yeah. His apartment went on sale in the real world. And they advertised it as John Rebus's apartment.
Oh my gosh.
So, because it's a real street and he lives on the second floor, and he's got a front window looking out, everybody knows where his apartment is. And so bizarrely, the owners of that apartment sold just after I had moved Rebus out. It was the strangest thing. Now, concomitant with that, when we moved into this apartment block, and it's the apartment block basically where Cafferty lives. So I've gone from living in the street where my hero lives to living in the street where my villain lives. And so sometimes I'm walking around down in the street here. I've been to get my coffee in the morning or been to the shop, and someone will stop me and say, so which apartment is Cafferty's then? Which one is it? And I'll say, it's that one up there, the triplex, the big glass triplex apartment. You can see it from these windows. It's hilarious.
That's too funny. You're now siding with your villain.
I need a psychotherapist to help me explain this.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this title, because obviously it's completely relevant for where we are right now. But as you said earlier, the first draft was written pre-pandemic, despite you doing some edits, and you were not writing a song for dark times as in the pandemic. You were perhaps inspired by the troubling times pre-pandemic. Do you want to talk a little bit about where kind of, I hate saying this phrase, the ideas for this book came from?
No, I'm happy to. I mean, I always get a title before I start the book. It may not end up being the final title, but it's a working title. And the title for me is the theme. The title of the book usually reveals the theme if you look closely enough at it. And yes, as you said, we were living through some pretty dark times in the middle of last year. We had wildfires everywhere from Western Seaboard USA to Australia. We had Brexit was happening in the UK. We were being wrenched out of Europe, and it was very chaotic and troubling times. And then we had the rise of the far right in Europe and elsewhere. It seemed to me that we were in very troubling times. And there was no middle ground. There was no room for discussion or debate. Everybody was polarized. Everybody was binary. Everybody was having to take a side. us and them, yes or no. And so I thought, these are dark times, and I happened upon this quote from the playwright Bertolt Brecht. You know, when the dark times come, will there still be singing? Yes, there will be songs about the dark times. I just thought that's perfect. Little did I know that COVID was just around the corner. So it does seem prescient, but the times were dark enough. And the thing I mentioned earlier about not prisoner of war camps per se, but internment camps, I'd got interested in this. There were over 1,000 of these in the UK in World War I, World War II. And you locked up your neighbours in them. You locked up people who had a German surname or an Italian surname, people who worked in a delicatessen or who ran the ice cream shop or the fish and chip shop, people with Chinese or Japanese surnames. Anybody who was different from you got locked up. Churchill said at the start of World War II, collar the lot. In other words, get them all and put them in a camp. So these internment camps, and I know they were not unknown in the US, the Japanese were kept in internment camps, but we had over 1,000 of them. And I just thought, we're heading that way again, potentially. The world is headed that way again, where we're getting very binary, it's becoming us and them, and we're being told to mistrust our partners and our neighbours and our near neighbours. So that you know, this gave me the corollary. That gave me something. The title of the book was all wrapped up in that. And then haven't done the research on internment camps, and haven't driven up to the very far north of Scotland where Rebus would eventually go. I came back to Edinburgh, and pretty much straight away the lockdown happened. And so the one piece of research I could not do in the book was go to Edinburgh Airport, which is 10 miles away from my apartment, because we weren't allowed to travel more than 5 miles from home. And you weren't allowed to go out for more than an hour a day. I couldn't go to Edinburgh Airport to check the car rental situation there, because there's a scene near the end of the book that involves a car rental desk and where they keep the car rental cars. So that was all fiction. The rest of the book is completely factual, but that scene I had to make up.
That's so funny. So let's talk a little bit about writing process. On a day that you're writing, because I know that readers find this infinitely fascinating. Like, on a day that you're writing, what's your schedule look like?
Well, I'm the laziest full-time writer that I know of who manages to write a lot, bizarrely. So I'll do anything to avoid writing, anything. Every morning I've got to have my coffee and read the newspaper from cover to cover. Then I've got to do the cryptic crossword. Then I've got to do the Sudoku. And then I maybe have to do some emails, and eventually I will manage to drag my sorry carcass to my office and try and get started. So I don't normally start writing until maybe 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And if the muse has not yet descended and the writing is difficult, I might walk away, just go for a walk, clear my head, try again, 2, 3 o'clock. Sometimes a good working day starts at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. But I can still get a lot done in a working day, even starting at that time. What I'm finding as I get older though, McKenna, I'm finding that I can't write for the length of time I used to write. And I know I've talked to other writers my age who are going through the same process. So after half an hour, 45 minutes, I'm spent, and I've got to walk away, have a break, a good break, and then come back and try again. When I was young and full of vim and vigor, I could write for 10 hours at a stretch, no problem at all, you know, powered by Snickers bars and not much else. And yeah, when the writing's going well, I'll skip lunch. I'll have a big breakfast, but then I'll skip lunch and I'll just keep writing. And I find the first draft takes between 30 and 40 days. The first draft, as I've said to you, I don't know when I start the book where it's going necessarily. I don't know who done it or why certain things happened. I find that out during the writing of the first draft. So the first draft is written fairly quickly so I can find out what the hell's going on. And then it all gets tidied up in the second and third drafts and meant to look like it was always meant to be that way. That's when the hard work comes in. It's not the first draft so much. First draft is a fun draft because you're just making stuff up. It's like being a kid again. A kid in your bedroom writing poems or writing stories or scribbling drawings and cartoons. It's like being a kid. You're in charge of this huge toy box or this huge sweetie shop, this store full of sugary goodness. And then it becomes a kind of job later on when you're having to try and put things together and make it all fit and make it all work. But yeah, the whole process takes about 6 months in total from beginning to end. So by May this year, I had a book to give to my publisher and they were able to bring it out this year. So, I mean, it's way under a year since I started thinking about this book, never mind started writing it. Thank goodness, the one thing I did do was I decided that it would be set in the summer of 2019. Because in the past, I've written a book, I've started writing a book thinking it'll be set in the summer coming, the summer that's coming up, not the summer past. If I'd done that this time, I would have been in trouble.
Yeah,
because Rebus would not have been able to travel up to the far north of Scotland to help his daughter. It would all have been done through Twitter and Zoom calls, and it would not have been the same book at all. And my God, there's a plethora of those books coming, I fear. A plethora of crime novels and stories set over Zoom meetings, murder by Zoom, and solving crimes through Zoom.
I hope not. You know, a lot of the authors, I've spoken to a lot of authors since the pandemic, a lot of virtual events. And I think most of them think maybe that should be best left in nonfiction and are skillfully setting books before March of this year, or, you know, writing something that's a prequel.
Well, I've just finished a new Michael Connelly, and he sneaks it in. He sneaks in a few mentions of COVID coming over the horizon. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's two things I would say. One is, I mean, well, several things. One, I'm not sure who wants to read about the pandemic so soon after it's finished. Right. Number two, crime fiction is at its best after the dust has settled. So, for example, Northern Ireland during the Troubles, hardly any crime fiction, if any. When the Troubles finished, people start to think about what just happened. And novelists start to think the same question and start to write about it to make sense of it. So some dust had to settle before we got great novels coming out of Northern Ireland about that situation. Maybe it's the same thing with COVID. But I can't imagine. I mean, I was, you know, cycling and walking through the main streets of Edinburgh, boarded up five-star hotels, boarded up art galleries, boarded up jeweler shops, thinking anything could be happening behind those boarded up windows. This is a gold mine for a writer. You know, a heist. I can imagine a heist story, perhaps, taking place during a time of COVID. But maybe not so much a crime novel. I don't know. Let's wait and see. One thing, just as a postscript to that, and people can go and look at this on YouTube if they like. While I was writing the novel, and of course I was writing it during lockdown, and people were getting in touch via Twitter and saying, oh my God, how would Rebus cope with lockdown? How would Rebus cope with COVID? Because he's got this health thing. The National Theatre of Scotland contacted me and they said, look, we would like to put on some virtual plays, just short 5-10 minute pieces, monologues. Would you about the situation? Would you consider writing one? And I went, I'd love to. And I wrote Rebus in lockdown. So it's basically a 10-minute monologue. So I got to write about how Rebus would be dealing with this and how he'd be feeling. And they said, oh, it's great, we love it. And Brian Cox has agreed to play Rebus. You'll know Brian Cox from Succession at the moment, and also being the first Hannibal Lecter on screen, amongst other roles. And he was in lockdown in upper state New York, in his cabin there, prior to filming the next season of Succession. So he dressed his cabin behind him to look like an Edinburgh tenement as much as possible. He had a map of Edinburgh up or a map of Scotland up. He had bottles of whiskey. He even went and bought cans of dog food because Rebus has a dog. Brian Cox does not have a dog, but he bought some dog food anyway. Bless him. And you can see it. It's on YouTube. It's on the National Theatre of Scotland's website. It's called Rebus Lockdown Blues, and it's fantastic. I mean, the hair went up on my arms watching him via Zoom as he did the rehearsals. He did a couple of rehearsals, then he did it, and it was extraordinary. And you know, I think that's probably all I want to say about Rebus and lockdown was said in that piece. So I don't feel the need to write a Rebus lockdown novel.
When we hang up, I'm going to go look that up. I haven't seen it yet. Okay, so...
By the way, during lockdown, Rebus gets deliveries of these, I would imagine. Siobhan Clark leaves his groceries at the door and knocks on the door and runs away, and he comes out and gets them. This is Brewdog Punk IPA. Brewed in Scotland, available in the States, brewed in Scotland. And it's it's an American-style IPA, very hoppy, not too strong, 5%, and Rebus would be drinking a few of those each day.
Perfect. So you mentioned when you have a bad day, you get up and take a walk and shake it off, come back. That was one of my questions. I have another one about John Rebus's world. So you've written a lot of books in this series. Some authors have what they call a Bible. Do you have that for Rebus's Edinburgh, or do you just know everyone and the whole fictional world is in your head?
No, I should have a Bible. I should. Years ago, a fan of the books, I was asked a question at an event in Edinburgh and I didn't know the answer to it. It was from a book way back in the past and I couldn't remember anything about the book. And this guy came up to me at the end and said, you need a reference of, you know, a kind of Bible of all the characters in your books and what role they play. And he did it. I mean, he did it for me and it was genius, but I think he moved to Australia. I lost touch. So it only goes up to about book number 12 or 13. I can refer to that. But what I tend to do is I've got books on the shelves. I've got my books on the shelves. And what I tend to do is I just put Post-it notes in. And the Post-it notes will be, you know, a description of a character when they enter the scene for the first time. So if I need to find out about this one, who's this one? Jude. Okay, Jude is Malcolm Fox's sister's partner. So, sorry, Malcolm Fox's sister. So if I need to know about her, I can find out. Christine Essen, who works with Siobhan Clarke. There's a little Post-it note there. So that's Christine. If I want to know what she looks like, I can just go to that. I've got stuff about his daughter living in Tongue, which is a real place in the north of Scotland. So that's what I tend to do. Or, you know, I just tend to sort of skim back through the books because I should keep a Bible. You're right, and I don't, and I'm very bad for it. I mean, I've not got a photographic memory, and increasingly as I get older, the memory gets worse. And people do pick you up on the tiniest details. The most criticism I've ever had for making a mistake in the books, the Oxford Bar, a real pub in Edinburgh, where Rebus drinks and where I drink, I put a little footrest along the front of the bar that didn't exist. I had misremembered. This is when I lived in France. I wasn't living in Edinburgh. And I came back to Scotland and people said, look, there's no there's no footrest along the front of the bar. So bless them, they put one in. They actually installed one to save my blushes eventually. But that mistake haunted me for years because I just misremembered from a distance. The Oxford Bar, it's quite sad. I mean, it was closed for months and then it reopened. They were reopened about 10 days and then they were told to shut down again. And it was shut during my 60th birthday. So on my 60th birthday back in April, I took a can of this stuff and a glass and I walked to the Oxford Bar and stood outside alone, stood outside this locked pub and drank a drink and took a little photograph and then walked home. That was my 1 hour mandatory exercise that day, was a walk to the Oxford Bar to celebrate in silence my 60th birthday. I couldn't, there was no way I wasn't going, I was no way I wasn't going to go to the Oxford Bar on my birthday. I always go to the Oxford Bar on my birthday.
You know, I will say that I've been lucky enough to join you there, and that place is tiny. So here's hoping that things improve so they can get back to normal soon. I don't know how.
I don't know how you do social distancing. I mean, and the other thing is you lose the atmosphere. The one thing that makes a pub a great pub for me is the atmosphere. And if people are being told to stand 6 feet apart, there's no atmosphere. I want to stand in a crowded bar, rubbing shoulders with people at the bar, which you're also not allowed to do now, and get stories, hear jokes, just meet new people. And if you're sitting one at a time in socially distanced tables and being served at the table, oh my God, no.
Right,
no.
It's horrendous. You might as well bring your own beer and stand outside.
You might as well bring your own beer and stand outside.
Yeah. Okay, so what kind of books or authors did you read in your formative years? Was there anything that you read where you went, I want to be a writer?
I think probably everything I read made me want to be a writer. I mean, it started off with comics, Batman and Superman, stuff like that. I tried to draw comics, but I wasn't any good at drawing. Lyrics, I would write lyrics for non-existent pop groups. I just loved the act of writing, and it took me out of a very small, stable, rather confined, claustrophobic world. I mean, I lived in a coal mining village of a few thousand people. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody was related to everybody else, you know, uncles and aunts all around me. Yeah. So to be, to have a different experience of the world, I disappeared into books. And from an early age, it was American literature to start with. So it was things like Catch-22 and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then The Godfather, I read. Literature, I mean, books, the big thing for me was age 12, I think, when I wasn't allowed to go and see X certificate movies. You had to be 18 to see these movies. but nobody stopped me reading the books. So it was stuff like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jaws, The Exorcist, The Godfather, French Connection, etc., etc. One of them, I've still got it here somewhere. One of them was Shaft. Remember Shaft?
Yeah.
Have I got it? Where is it? I'm not seeing it. It's there. It's somewhere on my bookshelves. I've got my paperback of Shaft at a box. I wasn't allowed to see the movie. I bought the single. I bought the Isaac Hayes soundtrack single, and I bought the book. And Shaft may have been the first crime novel I ever read, and it may be why John Rebus is called John.
Oh my gosh.
It may be. I mean, I think I might have got John from John Shaft. And Rebus, of course, is a puzzle. It means picture puzzle if you look at it in a dictionary. So that's why it's called Rebus. So yeah, it was everything. And then eventually I studied American Lit at university and loved it. And then did my PhD on it. You can see a photograph over my shoulder of Muriel Spark, famous Edinburgh novelist. You can just about make her out there. I did my PhD thesis on Muriel Spark, and she took me down a rabbit hole into dark Gothic Scottish literature. Robert Louis Stevenson, Jekyll and Hyde, stuff like that. And the first Rebus novel was written to be both a homage to Jekyll and Hyde and a critique of it, to say that Edinburgh still is a city, a Jekyll and Hyde city, and that all people still have within them the ability to do bad as well as do good, which I think is the basic question at the heart of all crime fiction. Why do human beings keep doing terrible things? And it's an easy question to ask and an almost limitless question to answer.
All right. So music. You're a big music fan and musician. Do you listen to music while you are writing, or is it distracting?
I love you calling me a musician. God bless you.
You're in a band, right?
Yeah, I'm vocals,
Okay,
not even singing, not even singing, vocals in a band. And my band, we played our last gig in December last year, and we've not rehearsed or anything since then. So whether we're still a band or not, I've got no idea. It's just a bunch of guys, mostly in their 50s, who should know better. All with other jobs, mostly journalists. Yeah, I do listen to music while I'm working, and I've actually just invested in something I thought I would never buy. I'm looking over my shoulder because it's sitting right looking at me. It's beautiful. It's a streamer made by Linn, Linn, which is a high-end audiophile company based in Scotland. And so I'm streaming a lot of music, which means I never need to get up from this chair. I can sit in this chair and work at my laptop computer and never need to move. Other than that, it was always CDs. I've kept a CD player. I do listen to CDs, or used to, but now it's all streaming. And it's instrumental music. It's stuff that just builds up an atmosphere. It turns this room into a bubble in which I can play with my characters. So very ambient stuff, electronica, jazz, a little bit of modern classical. Nothing too loud, nothing with words. Because I wouldn't be listening to the words. I wouldn't be writing. And I'm loving it. I mean, I probably buy more vinyl than I should. Having said that, I got rid of half my vinyl records when we moved. The collection is creeping up again. And what we've done is we bought 2 apartments. So if I look out my window, I can basically see the apartment I live in. But this is the apartment where I work. So that's a 3-bedroom apartment. This is a 1-bedroom apartment. And what this has got, I'm in the living room. This would be the living room. There's a little kitchenette just off to my right. Then through that wall is the bedroom, and the bedroom has become my listening room. So it's got a nice sofa, and it's got a ridiculously big vinyl playing hi-fi system. So I can, if I'm working, I'm sitting here. If I'm taking a little break, I've got a sofa behind me I can sit on or lie on. If I want to take a big break, I go next door and put a record on. Perfect man cave. Perfect man cave. And the commute takes me 45 seconds.
I think we can help, we can thank this for part of your productivity, because it sounds pretty perfect. I'm the same way. I can't, so I'm a violinist, right? So anything that's actually classical music or has prominent violin, I can't listen to, and I can't listen to lyrics. So I'm with you. It has to be ambient sounds or jazz or something that's outside of what I actually play, because I cannot work. I get too invested in the music, and I'm envious of people who can listen to whatever as background noise, because I cannot do it. So that makes perfect sense.
I mean, as a corollary to that, sometimes I find it hard to read and enjoy a crime novel because I'm too busy picking it apart. I'm sort of looking at how did the author do that? How did they make that happen, or how did they make me feel that? Sometimes I'm happier reading non-crime fiction because at least I can switch off that critical faculty, that kind of the mechanic part of me can get switched off, and I can just enjoy it as a story. I mean, I love reading crime fiction. I read a lot of crime fiction, but always part of me switched on. The critical faculty is switched on. It wouldn't be switched on if I was reading a different kind of fiction.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be hard to separate. Speaking of that, you have shout outs to Lee Child and Karen Slaughter in this book and some others. Who do you always read, and what have you read lately and loved? And it doesn't have to be crime fiction.
Well, let's talk about Lee Child and Karen Slaughter. They get mentioned in this book because at BoucherCon 2 years ago in St. Petersburg, Florida, they equaled each other in bids at a charity auction to be characters in my next book. Oh, did they? Yes, they did. They knew how hard that was going to be for me. You cannot have Detective Constable Lee Child and Detective Sergeant Karen Slaughter. It's ridiculous. Everybody's going to go, that's insane. So they had to be themselves. So I had to manufacture a way that I could get them into this new book. Yes, that's why they get mentioned in the book. Because people say, oh my God, I had no idea Rebus was a Lee Child fan. Lee Child paid for him to be a fan, for God's sake. It's product placement at its most onerous.
It was so funny. It was. Funny.
I mean, I liked it. In fact, my agent read the book. He was the first person to read it after my wife, and he said, "Ian, there's so many mentions of Lee Child and Karen Slaughter in this book. Can you take a few out? It's a bit obvious what's going on here." So actually, I toned it down. I think there were lots more mentions before. Anyway, yeah, that was fun. Who am I reading? Who have I read? You know what? I hate getting that question because my mind always goes very blank. What I will say is that during lockdown, like a lot of people, I thought I'll be reading the classics. I'll be reading Moby Dick, Don Quixote, Brothers Karamazov. No, I turned to nice, skinny books, comfort reads. And as part of that, I turned to, there are new translations of Simenon's novels that Penguin have been putting out 1 or 2 a month for the last year or so. And I went into Simenon. I read some of the Maigret books, Inspector Maigret, and I read some of his what are called romans durs, his non-Maigret books, which are quite hard, tough, flinty crime stories with possibly no goodies, just baddies. It's quite a dark moral universe. And I really enjoyed that. I thought, and some of them, because I mean, some of them were written in the 40s and they just read as so modern. Yeah. They're just so frank. And I went, wow, I'd forgotten how good a writer and how frank a writer and how modern a writer you were, sir. So yeah, I dived into those and that was great. I've just finished the new Michael Connelly, which is fantastic, the new Mickey Heller book. I'm reading, what am I reading just now? There's a guy called Mick Herron. Do you know Mick Herron? He writes spy novels. Yeah, okay. He writes these spy novels. They're kind of like Le Carré with a sense of humor. And for those who read a lot of crime fiction, his main character, Jackson Lamb, this huge, gargantuan, unlovable slob of a guy, is very much taken from the DNA of Andy D.L. from Reginald Hill's D.L. and Pascal novels. For those who've read those fantastic English whodunit novels. And I just love all those. And he's got one coming out early next year called Slough House. Mick Herron has a book coming out called Slough House. And I've just finished it, and it just made me laugh out loud. And yet it's tense and it's exciting and it's a spy story. So that's one of those books where I go, how did you do that? How did you manage to write a novel that's as good as anything Le Carré can write, but is also funny and makes me care about the characters, even though they're all losers and they're unlikable? It's just he walks a tightrope, Mick Herron, when he writes those books, but he does it brilliantly. I
was just talking with his publisher about those the other day, so that I will mention to them that you just gave them a shout out.
Yeah, do. He's not on social media. He's bizarre. I've interviewed him in Edinburgh. I interviewed him at a bookshop in Edinburgh last year, and he's just not on social media. He just doesn't do it. He's not on Twitter. He's not on Facebook. Nothing. He's the last of a dying breed, I think.
Okay, I see all the questions. I'm going to get to all the questions shortly. Thank you for your patience. I have a couple other things from me, and then we'll do the questions. So I saw an interview with you in The Guardian where you said this: while researching my first novel, I became a suspect for a short time in a real life case that had similarities to the story I was writing. I want to know that story.
Well, you know, that story, I've told it so many times that it's grown
I
and grown
haven't
and
heard
grown.
it.
Well,
I
it's
haven't
grown.
heard it.
It's well, you've obviously skipped a couple of sessions in the shop then when I've told that story, because I'm sure I've told that story in your store before. Okay, so I'm a student, I'm a PhD student, I'm writing a book about a cop, I know nothing about the cops. I write to the chief of police, will you help me? And I got a letter back from his secretary saying, go to this police station and talk to these two detectives at this certain time. So I wander in there looking like a tramp, looking like a vagrant, basically, middle of winter. And these two guys, very dapper detectives, said, so what's the story of your book? And I gave them the plot of Noughts and Crosses, which happened to be similar to a case they were working on. So they said, oh, this is interesting. Well, come over here and look. Why don't we pretend you're a suspect in an ongoing inquiry? Because that would give you some back. Yeah, so yeah, it's great. Well, we'll just put your details in the computer. And they had this very basic computer, but they put my details in. And it was only afterwards, when I found out they were investigating this crime, I thought, oh my God, they put, you know, I'm in the database. I am, and I was about the only suspect they had at that time. And it was a missing persons case, which ended up being a murder case with 7 victims. And I was one of the first suspects. I don't think I was taken very seriously as a suspect. Yeah. But if I tell that story in a store, it grows legs, and it becomes, you know, they're basically handcuffing me and slapping me about and shining torches, flashlights in my face to get me to confess. But yeah, and after that, I didn't go near the police for years. For years, I thought, no, Ian, you'll just get in trouble if you do that again. And it wasn't until I had a book published, and I did an event in Edinburgh, and a guy came up at the end to get a book signed and said, I'm a detective sergeant in Edinburgh. You make a few mistakes. Procedurally, you make a few mistakes. And I said, yeah, because I can't go near you guys. I become a suspect in a murder investigation. So he became, and still is, although he's now long retired, still is a friend, became a good friend. And he would sneak me into police stations. He would sneak out murder case notes. He would introduce me to pathologists, lawyers, social work, you know, all other cops. He was fantastic. So the books after that did get a bit more realistic.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to do questions from the audience, and then I always wrap up my one-on-one interviews with a few questions, rapid-fire questions from the Proust questionnaire. So we'll get to those shortly. Let's see. Eric was wondering, do you see a time where Rebus dies?
Well, I guess he's got to, but that doesn't mean to say he's gone forever, does it? We know this. Fictional characters can continue long after the death of the author. You know, we're still getting James Bond books, we're still getting Sherlock Holmes books, etc., etc. We're still getting Agatha Christie stories. So just because I kill him off doesn't mean to say he stays dead. You know, maybe he's like a vampire, and after I'm gone, he gets back up out of his grave and he starts roaming the earth again, solving crimes. I've not thought about it. I've not thought of an endpoint for him, but there will have to be one. Now, whether he just walks off the page and doesn't come back, or whether he dies in a blaze of glory, I don't know. I never know. I mean, I don't even know what the next book's going to be about. So,
you know, it was interesting. Lee Child just had his new book out, and Andrew, his brother, is writing or working with him writing on taking over the series. And it was interesting talking about how Lee had always thought that Jack Reacher would go out in a blaze of fire and that would end the series. And the conversation was that would be a great disservice for his fans who still love Reacher. So in essence, Reacher has outlived Lee's desire to write Reacher. So he and Andrew came up with a compromise that Andrew would take over the series. But it was interesting that he had thought out, like, I always thought I would have Reacher die. And then every time he mentioned that, fans would groan so much that he said that he would have, rather than Reacher get on a bus to go to the next location, he would have Reacher go, you know, this seems like a pretty good place, I'll get a dog. And then Reacher would be settled, which to me as a reader and fan, that seems better than just killing off Reacher. But, you know, it's always
I had a conversation years ago with P.D. James about, it turns out it was apocryphal. I'd heard a story that Ruth Rendell had written a posthumous Inspector Wexford book, a book in which Wexford would die that would be published after her death. And I told that story to P.D. James, who at this point was in her 80s. And she said, oh, that's quite a good idea. maybe I should do that with my character. She never did, and it turned out that Ruth Rendell hadn't done it either. So there was no posthumous Wexford book. But there was a story going around writers. It was a story that writers told to each other that there was a posthumous Wexford book that would be published after Ruth Rendell's death.
You know, it's not the worst idea.
No.
Okay, so Kay was wondering, are there any memories you can share about the late, greatly lamented Philip Carr? I'm so lucky to have met both of you at McKenna's wonderful bookstore. Oh
God. Yeah, I mean, he was a complicated character, Philip. Born in Edinburgh, brought up in Edinburgh, went to school here, but hated the place. He actually wrote a crime story called something like "Why I Hate Edinburgh" once upon a time. I loved him to bits. Fantastic character. Bernie Gunter, just an extraordinary character. You've probably not seen it, but the UK publication of Philip's posthumous Bernie Gunter novel, Metropolis, I wrote the introduction to it.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
No, for the UK edition. Which was kind of moving in a way to read that book, knowing that he knew he was ill while he was writing it.
Yeah.
But nobody knew. He didn't tell he didn't tell anybody I know. I mean, he probably would certainly have told his family, but nobody who knew him as a, fellow authors didn't know. And it was kind of sad, and it was shocking, and it was sudden. The last time we hung out together in any way, shape or form at length, we did an event together at Bloody Scotland, which is a Scottish crime fiction festival that takes place in the city of Stirling. And I'd interviewed him on stage. And then he said, "What are you doing now?" I said, "Well, I'm just driving back to Edinburgh." He said, "Oh, I'm going to Edinburgh for a night. Can I get a lift?" So we drove back to Edinburgh together. And he said, "Look, do you want to meet for dinner?" I went, "Yeah, great." So he said, "Look, I'll go and see my friend I've got to see, and I'm staying there tonight. We'll meet for dinner later." And so just lovely, long, leisurely wine dinner in a nice hotel in central Edinburgh, and just talked and talked and talked. And one of the ideas we came up with was that we were going to do something together. We weren't exactly sure what. We thought possibly a film or a TV, something. And we exchanged some emails after that about what we might do. And then he was gone. And that was it. But yeah, he was, just an extraordinary, to create a character like Bernie Gunter was an extraordinary feat. And the final novel, I think, is as good as any of them. And I'm so sad that he's gone. He just died so young, And I didn't get to spend nearly enough time with him.
Yeah, well, I think we all feel the same way. Clearly, you had some more quality time, but he's definitely missed. Let's see. Hang on. I think that is all the actual questions rather than
comments.
We
What's
have
this man doing on my screen? Who is he?
No, we have "I love Brian Cox" and beer and comments like that. So so that actually times out pretty well. I am going to wrap up this chat with a few Proust questionnaire questions. For those of you who don't know what that is, Marcel Proust came up with a list of questions, the late 1880s, where he used to go around and ask these at cocktail parties. In essence, they're a way to get to know someone. I always like to do this so we get to know the author outside of their work. And they're not the morbid, terrible ones. Okay, what is your most prized possession?
Possibly my signed copy of The Primus Jean Brodie, signed to me by Muriel Spark. The one time I met her. The one and only time I met her. After her death, I did make a TV documentary about her, which meant I got to spend some time in Italy and went to her grave. And she was buried in Italy where she lived. And on the grave, it just says Muriel Spark, poeta, poet. Doesn't mention the fact that she was famous as a novelist. She always thought of herself as a poet. So that's the one thing I would, that and my signed Keith Richards book, I would save from the fire.
Wonderful. That's the whole point. What would you save from the fire? Which words or phrases do you overuse?
Like, as a pause filler. It's a very Scottish thing. So like, I was walking down the street and like this guy stopped me and he said to me, like, "What do you do for a living, pal?" And I said, "Well, like, I'm a writer, And he said, "Well, like, what do you write?" And I said, "Well, like."
Do you have a word or phrase that your editor is constantly calling out that you use too much in your books?
There's always a trestle table in my books. I've no idea why. but there's always a trestle table. And I'm actually, this computer that I'm on at the moment is sitting on a trestle table, which I've owned since 1986, and it's gone everywhere. It's gone from London to France to Edinburgh. Every book I've written since 1986 has been written on this trestle table. Maybe that subconsciously is why I mention a trestle table in every Rebus novel.
That trestle table will have to go to the archives as well. That's pretty amazing. What do you most value in your friends?
Dishonesty. You know, I don't want them to tell me what they really think of me. I want them to flatter me at all points in time.
Excellent.
Well, no, what do you want in friendship? Well, you know what? I just met up with an old friend of mine on Saturday there for a cup of coffee and a walk. I've known him since we were 15. There's something as I get older, I mean, I value friendship more. I've never had a great number of friends, you know, and most of the friends I've still got are friends I made at high school. People I'm still in touch with are people I've known from high school or university. Very few friends I've made since then. So if you can survive me, you can survive anything, I think probably is what I'm saying. But, you know, the friends I've got tend to like the same music as me, the same kinds of books, and we just like hanging out. We don't need to say very much. We just like hanging out.
Yeah, sounds like a good friend. Which talent would you most like to have?
Any musical instrument. I mean, maybe not violin. I mean, I do like a violin. Cello. I love a cello.
Cello,
I love
yeah.
a cello. If I could play, it would be electric guitar or possibly tenor sax, jazz tenor sax, really kind of sleepy, nightclubby vibe, yeah. Tenor sax, Coleman Hawkins style tenor sax. Yeah, but I've tried piano, I've tried guitar. I've just not got any musical genes.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot to it. That's a lot to it. I'm just glad you didn't say soprano sax.
Oh, no.
All right. What is your current state of mind?
Bored? Can I say that?
Thanks for that, Ian.
No, I mean, not right this second, but just in general. I mean, today I was lying on the sofa reading a book going, I've been reading books for 6 months now. I want something different. I mean, books are great, music's great, but my life has been circumscribed to such an extent. I just want to jump on a plane and go somewhere exotic. I want to go somewhere that isn't Edinburgh or isn't Scotland. I want to go somewhere warm and sunny with a beach and swimming pools and eat meals outside at a cafe and stuff and just have an exotic experience. And, you know, I mean, everybody says, well, you know, during wartime, people did this for years. And you go, yeah, people did do it for years. It's true. And we're very soft compared to our predecessors. But yeah, I'm just, you know, that's why I'm thinking of starting a new book, is because otherwise I'm just going to get bored.
Yeah. And then my last question I always like to end on, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
Apart from speaking to you, you mean, and drinking a beer? Perfect happiness. Oh, geez, it's so hard. A good gig, a good music gig, you know? I just love the way that music, live music, and the experience of being around other people who are also getting it as you get it, takes you out of yourself. It elevates you, and it takes you to different spaces. And it's going to be the last thing to come back. I think the last thing to come back after the pandemic is going to be live music. Can you imagine a sweaty club with people all squeezed in, shoulder to shoulder? I just can't imagine it. I can't imagine A, it happening, or B, people wanting to be there in that situation. And yet, if you take away the audience and you have everybody 6 or 8 feet apart with perspex sheets between them, you just lose everything that makes a live music experience a great experience. So I think that's perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I really miss it. I miss going to gigs. I've missed so many. I've missed so many gigs. You know, I've got tickets for them. They just haven't happened.
Yeah, no, I know. I will say, as a violinist and live musician, we've done, people are adapting, right? So like I play in a string quartet, we've been doing pop music and we've been doing porch concerts. People have asked us to their homes, and people from their whole neighborhood bring 200 chairs. They set up in their small family groups outside, and we've played live concerts where we are able to take requests. And the first one we did has to have been one of the most magical days of this year, like, because that sense of community and people engaged and enjoying that moment is you can't recreate it any other way. You can't do it on Zoom. Like we were talking about earlier with the bookstore events. Like, this is great, and people can watch from wherever and they can ask questions, but it's not the same as a room full shoulder to shoulder. And the first week of March, I still think back as like, I cannot believe this even happened this year. The first week of March, I played with the Eagles for a live concert. And we were on stage, and we were in the basketball stadium here, where it was shoulder to shoulder, every person on the floor, every seat packed, everyone singing at the top of their lungs, along with like Desperado. When can we do that again?
Yeah.
So, it's so hard to think that was something so recent ago, as in March, and then there's no timeline for when it's going to come back. So, it's definitely depressing as one of those musicians who doesn't get to play them, but we're missing it too. So anyway.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's time, being a writer, I'm luckier than most. I mean, actors, comedians, a small comedy club. I mean, I met a comedian, quite a famous comedian who lives in Edinburgh. I met him recently, and he said, I'm a killer. I'm a trained killer. I am trained to make people expel jets of water from their mouths as they laugh and guffaw in a small crowded room. He said, I should never be allowed on stage again. I'm basically an assassin. So, so at least as a writer, there's always a way of getting your work out to people. And indie bookshops, in the States, I'm sure it's true, certainly true in the UK, indie bookshops really punched above their weight during the lockdown. They would bicycle books to your door. They would leave them in bags at their door if you wanted to collect them. You could order online, you could order over the phone. They would, if you wanted books, they would get you books. And the local communities wanted those stores to stay open. And so they were, there's a bookstore in Edinburgh I was at a few days ago, and they said, since we reopened, since lockdown ended, we've been busier than ever because people don't want to lose us. They now know what it's like to lose their bookstore in their high street. And of course, because, indie bookstores are smaller, they're nimble in a way that the big conglomerates cannot be nimble. And so you can, as you've said, you can change the way of doing business to a certain extent. You hope that you get through it. And I'm just blessed that readers keep reading. I thank God readers keep reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of books that have been sold during this time is astronomical, and we're fortunate. Obviously, Amazon has gotten a huge portion of that, but the number of people who have pointedly placed orders with us because they want us to be here at the end of this is remarkable and appreciated. And we've done the same thing. We've, dropped off bags on people's porches, and we've done curbside pickup, and we only just opened to people walking in on October 31st. We've done appointments, we've done anything you can think of to make a safe shopping experience and get people entertainment, whether it's jigsaw puzzles or books or whatever it is. So yeah, it's definitely, I'm happy that we are currently here where we are with a good outlook for the holidays, and fingers crossed everything keeps going okay. But it's no small part to people trying hard to support us. So that is definitely appreciated.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I guess we will end on that happy bookseller note. And it's been a pleasure.
With a hooray to readers.
To readers and book buyers. I'm so sad that we're not having margaritas post-event. But
I know. And how warm did you say it was there? 70 degrees?
It's about 70, 80, yeah. Sunny.
Lord.
Yeah.
You don't know you're born.
But we will, at some point, I'm certain, have margaritas in the future.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you so much. And cheers to you and the new book. It's an absolute pleasure to chat with you. Bye.
Thanks,
cheers.
Folks. Take care.